Under the steel gray sky, the towering facade of Monarch Health Hospital loomed large, casting its shadow across the city streets below. A symbol of prestige and power, Monarch was revered across the United States as one of the best hospitals money could buy, a place where only the elite of the elite were given access to the best care, the best specialists, and the best technology. To be treated here was more than a medical necessity, it was a statement of status. Inside the sleek marble lobby, a quiet tension hummed. Nurses moved with purpose, their white coats pristine, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. Patients in designer suits and high heels sat patiently, knowing that in this hospital, they would receive the kind of care ordinary people could only dream of. Today, however, a different sort of patient arrived at Monarch's grand revolving doors. Tall, graceful, and exuding an air of quiet confidence, the billionaire businesswoman stepped into the lobby. Her gaze steady, her presence demanding respect without uttering a word. She was known across industries, her name synonymous with success and ambition. She had built an empire from the ground up, making her one of the wealthiest women in the world. People knew her name, admired her tenacity. And yet, here, in this place, she was just another patient. But this was no ordinary visit for her. She was here because she needed help. Beneath the calm exterior, there was pain, a pain she'd kept hidden from the world. A pain she was willing to admit to only within the walls of a trusted medical institution. Monarch, with its reputation and its resources, was supposed to be that place as Elisa prepared for her official last day at Monarch Health. Emotions ran high. Staff members who had worked closely with her gathered in the main atrium for a farewell celebration, filling the room with laughter, gratitude, and shared memories. The people she had inspired, doctors, nurses, administrators, and patients alike, looked up to her with admiration. They knew her departure marked the end of an era, but they also knew she had set a powerful course for the hospital's future. Standing at the front of the room, Elisa took a moment to look out over the faces of those who had been by her side throughout her journey. These were the people who had fought with her, the ones who had embraced her vision and given their best to bring it to life. Each of them represented a piece of the legacy she was leaving behind. As the crowd quieted, she spoke with heartfelt sincerity. It's hard to put into words what this journey has meant to me. When I first came to Monarch Health, I never imagined the impact this place would have on my life. Together, we've transformed this hospital into something greater than we could have dreamed, a place where every patient, regardless of who they are, can find hope and healing. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The room was silent, every person absorbed in the significance of the moment. This isn't just my legacy, she continued. It's our legacy. Each one of you has contributed to this vision. The work we've done here, the changes we've made, they belong to all of us. And as I step away, I know that Monarch Health will continue to thrive because of the passion, dedication, and heart that you bring to it every day. Tears filled her eyes, and as she looked around the room, she saw many others wiping their own. For a moment, they stood together, united by the shared journey they had taken. Elisa felt a surge of pride, gratitude, and love for the people who had made Monarch Health her home. "Excuse me," she said, her voice both soft and firm as she approached the front desk. "I have an appointment scheduled under the name Elisa Warren." The receptionist looked up, her gaze quickly shifting from professional neutrality to something colder, harder. Her eyes lingered on Elisa's face for a beat too long. And her smile, which had been so ready for the patient before, faded slightly. "One moment. Please," the receptionist murmured. Her tone clipped. She typed something into the computer. her nails clicking sharply against the keys. The seconds stretched on, an uncomfortable silence growing between them. When the receptionist looked up, her expression had transformed entirely. She cleared her throat, her eyes avoiding Elisa's. "I'm sorry, but it appears that we won't be able to accommodate you today," she said, her voice robotic, as if rehearsed. Elisa's brows knitted together in confusion. "What do you mean?" "My appointment was confirmed last week. I've traveled a long way to be here." The receptionist's gaze hardened. Her lips pressed into a tight line. "I understand that, Ms. Warren. But there seems to be an issue with availability. Perhaps it would be best if you sought care elsewhere." Elisa felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. Availability? This was Monarch, a hospital known for its abundant resources and top-tier facilities. She had made arrangements through proper channels, ensured that everything was set. Yet here she was, turned away at the door. As if she were invisible. As if she didn't matter. "Are you telling me," she said, her voice low and controlled, "that there's no room for me in this hospital?" The receptionist's response was a nonchalant shrug. "Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do. Policies are policies." For a moment, Elisa simply stood there, stunned into silence. She'd experienced her share of prejudice in the business world: cold stares, dismissive attitudes, subtle rejections masked by polite words, but this was different. This was a place where lives were saved, where people's well-being was prioritized. Or so she'd thought. Elisa's voice grew firmer. "I'd like to speak to the administrator." "Please." The receptionist hesitated, her expression darkening. "The administrator is unavailable at the moment. If you would like, I can arrange for someone from security to escort you out." It was a subtle threat, one that conveyed volumes without needing further explanation. Her presence was unwelcome here, and it was clear that no amount of money, power, or influence could change that fact. Not in this place. Elisa clenched her fists, the sting of humiliation burning in her chest. She could feel the eyes of other patients on her, watching, perhaps recognizing her. Yet no one spoke up. The rejection was as loud as a shout in the silence of that pristine lobby. And for the first time in a long time, Elisa felt powerless. Turning on her heel, she walked out of Monarch's doors, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She felt anger. Yes. But beneath that was something deeper, a fierce determination that began to take shape as she strode away from the hospital. This wasn't over, she told herself. Not by a long shot. Little did Monarch Health know. The woman they had just turned away wasn't simply another patient. She was a force of nature. And she was coming back, this time. Not as a patient seeking their care, but as the new owner of the very institution that had rejected her as Elisa Warren left the polished marble confines of Monarch Health. The bitterness of rejection simmered within her. The air outside was crisp, yet she barely felt it as her thoughts churned. She'd made it her life's mission to rise above, to prove to the world that she belonged, yet here she was, forced to face an ugly truth she thought she'd left behind. Back in her car, she sat in silence, allowing the weight of the experience to settle. Monarch wasn't just any hospital, it was a sanctuary for those who sought the best care, often reserved for the privileged few. But now, that privilege had betrayed her. And as she thought about the disdain in the receptionist's voice, the veiled hostility that lurked beneath every dismissive word, her resolve only grew stronger. She couldn't let this go unanswered. With a deep breath, she reached for her phone and began researching Monarch's structure. Its board, its stakeholders, even the small handful of people who held majority control. What she found was both surprising and disheartening. Monarch. The institution so highly regarded, harbored policies and practices that quietly yet effectively excluded people like her, policies veiled under availability issues or patient compatibility. The reality was, in the corridors of this elite hospital, her status as a black woman, even one of substantial wealth, rendered her invisible. Days turned into nights as Elisa's team of researchers, investigators, and lawyers dug deeper, unraveling more layers of Monarch's unspoken hierarchy. She read through testimonies from former patients who'd experienced similar treatment, and heard from doctors who quietly voiced their concerns about the hospital's skewed policies. Monarch Health, it seemed, had a history of turning a blind eye when it came to inclusivity and equal access. The more she learned, the angrier she became, but in her anger was clarity. She knew exactly what she had to do a week after her rejection. Elisa stood in her expansive office, gazing out at the city below. Her mind was set, her plan meticulously crafted. This was no longer just a personal vendetta, it was a mission. She was determined to dismantle the very foundation of discrimination that Monarch had operated on and turn it into a symbol of inclusivity and compassion. But to do so, she needed to play her cards carefully. Elisa, we've secured the shares, her advisor's voice crackled through the speakerphone, pulling her out of her thoughts. Good, she replied, her tone firm. Proceed with the acquisition as planned. I want our presence there to be subtle, undetectable, until the final moment. Piece by piece, Elisa began purchasing stock, collecting allies within the board, slowly building her power. She was methodical, never rushing, always maintaining a cloak of anonymity. She acquired each share quietly, through shell companies and partnerships, ensuring that her hand in the deal would go unnoticed. As weeks passed, the shares grew. Each acquisition brought her one step closer to her goal. She was relentless, her determination growing with each passing day. Monarch might have rejected her, but she wasn't about to let that be the end of the story. This wasn't just business, it was personal. And when the time came, she was prepared to show Monarch what real power looked like. Months later, on a crisp fall morning, the board members of Monarch Health Hospital gathered for what they assumed would be a routine meeting. Whispers filled the room as members shuffled in, taking their seats around the long oak conference table. Unaware of the day's impending shift, the chairman began the meeting, his voice confident as he addressed the room. Unaware of the bombshell about to drop. Halfway through his address, the doors to the boardroom swung open, and in walked Elisa Warren, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. The board members looked up, surprised by the unexpected entrance of a figure they recognized from the headlines but never imagined would stand before them. A murmur of shock rippled through the room, and the chairman stammered, his confidence momentarily shaken. Ms. Warren, we weren't expecting you today. Elisa's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. I'm sure you weren't, she replied, her voice steady. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone in the room uncomfortable. I believe you've all been informed of some recent changes in Monarch's ownership, she continued, walking slowly to the head of the table. She placed a hand on the chairman's shoulder, signaling him to vacate the seat. He complied, his face pale, as Elisa took her place, reclaiming the authority that had been denied to her months before. Allow me to introduce myself, she said, leaning forward, her gaze moving from one board member to the next. I am now the majority owner of Monarch Health. The gasps that followed were almost satisfying. A small reward for the weeks of planning and persistence that had led her to this moment. One by one, the board members began to understand the gravity of the situation. Monarch Health, The hospital they had once prided themselves on controlling was now in the hands of the very woman they had turned away. With her position solidified, Elisa wasted no time in initiating the sweeping changes she had envisioned. Policies were rewritten. Training sessions on diversity and inclusion became mandatory. And, most importantly, she established a new standard for patient care, one that ensured no one would ever be turned away based on prejudice, perceived status, or background. Doctors and nurses soon noticed the difference. The culture of exclusivity that had long pervaded the hospital was replaced by an ethos of respect, compassion, and equality. Under Elisa's leadership, Monarch transformed from a symbol of privilege to a beacon of fairness in healthcare. A place where patients felt valued not for their wealth or social standing, but simply for being human. Over time, Elisa's impact on Monarch Health began to extend beyond the hospital walls. Her changes inspired similar initiatives in other healthcare institutions, pushing forward a new era of accountability and inclusivity. Monarch became a model, and Elisa's journey from rejection to ownership became a powerful story told across boardrooms, classrooms, and homes alike. The hospital that had once turned her away was now a testament to her strength and resilience, a place transformed by her vision and determination. Elisa's legacy was not just in the walls of Monarch Health but in the lives of the countless patients who would receive the care they deserved, without fear of rejection. As she looked over the thriving institution she now called her own, Elisa Warren knew that her journey had only just begun. She had proven, to herself and to the world, that power was more than wealth. It was the ability to enact change, to right wrongs, and to leave a legacy that others could believe in. The silence that followed Elisa's declaration was thick and heavy. Eyes darted from one face to another, some widening in astonishment, others narrowing with veiled resentment. The chairman, who had moments earlier exuded confidence and control, now sat awkwardly to the side, his face a mask of barely concealed irritation. No one had expected this, least of all him. Elisa let the moment stretch, enjoying the charged silence, the weight of her words settling on each of them like a stone dropped into still water, rippling out in waves of disbelief. She kept her gaze steady, allowing her quiet authority to do the talking. "I'm sure many of you are wondering how we got here," she said, her voice smooth and unwavering. She looked each board member directly in the eye, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "Months ago, I came to Monarch Health seeking care, seeking help, because I believe that this institution was built on principles of integrity and compassion. But I was turned away, rejected, as if my presence here was a mere inconvenience." A few faces shifted uncomfortably, eyes cast downward. Some members were well aware of the hospital's unofficial practices, the unspoken rules that had allowed them to maintain their exclusive reputation. But none had ever expected those same practices to turn against them so publicly. "I chose to turn this rejection into an opportunity for change," Elisa continued, her tone hardening. "Starting today, Monarch Health will no longer operate under the policies that have kept it insulated from the very people it's meant to serve. This hospital will open its doors to all, because healthcare is not a privilege reserved for the few, but a right that belongs to everyone." Her words landed with a weight that was almost tangible. A few of the board members, realizing the gravity of her intentions, exchanged worried glances. To them, the hospital's exclusivity was its lifeblood, its defining feature. If Elisa dismantled that, it would change everything. One man, a senior board member with silver hair and an air of superiority, cleared his throat and addressed her. "Ms. Warren, with all due respect, Monarch has always been selective in its approach. It's part of what makes us selective." Elisa interrupted, her voice laced with scorn. "What you call selective is exclusionary. discriminatory, and unjust. I experienced it firsthand. And I won't stand for it. Not anymore. From this day forward, Monarch will be a place where every patient, regardless of race, status, or wealth, is treated with dignity. The senior board member bristled, his face turning red. He wasn't used to being interrupted, especially by someone like Elisa, a woman, and a black one at that. But before he could respond, she continued. If any of you have a problem with this new direction, she said, her gaze steely, you're welcome to resign. I'll be accepting letters of resignation through the end of the week. The room fell silent again. But this time it was different. There was a sense of finality, of unshakable resolve in her words that left no room for argument. Elisa had spoken, and there was no turning back. In the weeks that followed, Monarch Health underwent a metamorphosis. Elisa's influence was felt in every department, every corridor, every decision made. She held daily meetings with department heads, challenging them to rethink policies that had long been taken for granted. Training sessions were scheduled for the entire staff, from doctors to janitors, with a focus on inclusivity, patient care, and respect. Elisa herself attended these sessions, not as an observer, but as a participant. She engaged in open discussions, listened to stories from employees who had felt marginalized within their own institution, and encouraged everyone to share their thoughts. Gradually, Monarch's culture began to shift, the weight of its old prejudices slowly lifting. One day, during a session on patient empathy, a young nurse named Jordan hesitantly raised her hand. She'd been working at Monarch for 5 years and had witnessed countless instances of patients being turned away for reasons that were barely disguised prejudices. Her voice wavered as she spoke, but she kept her gaze steady. I think the changes you're making are what we've needed for a long time," Jordan said. Her cheeks flushed. "I've seen patients denied care for reasons that had nothing to do with their medical needs. And it always felt wrong. But, well, before now, there wasn't anything we could do about it." Elisa nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you for sharing that, Jordan. What you're describing is exactly why these changes are necessary. Monarch has the potential to be a beacon of hope, a place where people feel safe and valued. That's what we're working toward." A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Elisa could see the impact her words were having, and it fueled her determination even further. Every story shared, every hand raised in support, was a reminder that the fight was worth it. She was building something far greater than herself, a legacy of compassion. A hospital that truly cared. News of Elisa's takeover and the changes at Monarch Health spread like wildfire. Headlines splashed across newspapers, online platforms, and social media, sparking debates, admiration, and controversy. People from all walks of life were inspired by Elisa's story, seeing in her a symbol of resilience and determination. Interviews, articles, and op-eds hailed her as a visionary leader, a woman unafraid to confront and dismantle systems of power. However, not everyone was pleased. Certain influential figures who had previously enjoyed Monarch's exclusivity bristled at the new direction. They saw Elisa's policies as a threat to the hospital's prestige and voiced their disapproval through various channels. Some even attempted to undermine her. But Elisa's supporters, staff, patients, and members of the public alike stood firmly by her side. One evening, as she watched a news segment featuring her story, Elisa felt a swell of emotion. People from all over the country had shared their own stories of exclusion, of feeling unwelcome in places that should have been safe. She realized that Monarch Health's transformation was touching lives far beyond the hospital's walls, sparking conversations and inspiring change nationwide. As weeks turned into months, the changes Elisa had implemented began to bear fruit. Staff morale improved, and the once stoic hospital corridors now buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. Nurses and doctors who had once felt constrained by outdated practices found themselves empowered to provide care in a way that aligned with their values. Elisa made it a point to walk through the hospital regularly, speaking with employees, checking in on patients, and ensuring that her vision was being realized at every level. One afternoon, she stopped by the intensive care unit, where she noticed Dr. Thompson, one of the hospital's senior surgeons, watching her with an unreadable expression. Dr. Thompson had been at Monarch for decades, a respected figure known for his skill but also his adherence to tradition. At first, he had resisted Elisa's changes, viewing them as unnecessary disruptions. But as he watched her interact with patients, her sincerity and commitment slowly began to chip away at his reservations. Dr. Thompson. Elisa greeted him, her tone warm but respectful. "How are things going in your department? Any feedback on the recent changes?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll admit, I was skeptical at first," he said, his voice gruff. "But I see now that these changes are making a real difference. I had a patient last week, a single mother who couldn't afford the usual rates. Under the old policies, she wouldn't have been able to receive the treatment she needed. But because of your new guidelines, we were able to help her. It felt right." Elisa smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her eyes. "That's exactly what I hoped for. Dr. Thompson. Thank you for keeping an open mind. Together, we're building something better." Dr. Thompson gave her a curt nod, a reluctant smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time, he understood what she was trying to achieve, and he respected her for it. As Elisa stood in her office one evening, watching the sunset over the city, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Monarch Health was no longer the institution that had rejected her, that had clung to outdated principles. It was now a place of healing and compassion, a beacon of hope for all who sought its care. In the months following her takeover, Monarch's patient base grew. Word of the hospital's new, inclusive practices spread, drawing patients from all backgrounds, many of whom had previously felt excluded or overlooked. The hospital thrived not just as a medical institution, but as a symbol of what was possible when one person dared to challenge the status quo. Elisa's journey from rejection to ownership had not only transformed Monarch but had ignited a movement across the healthcare industry, prompting other institutions to reevaluate their own practices. Her story became a rallying cry, a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief in justice. And as she gazed out at the city lights, Elisa felt a quiet satisfaction settle within her. She had turned pain into purpose, transformed rejection into a revolution. Monarch Health was hers, not just in name, but in spirit. And it would forever stand as a testament to her vision, her strength, and her legacy of compassion. While Elisa's transformation of Monarch Health had earned admiration from many, not all were on board. Beneath the surface of progress and unity, a few staff members, particularly those who had benefited from the hospital's old policies, quietly resisted. Some doctors and senior administrators felt their influence waning as the hospital's culture shifted, their previously unquestioned authority now subject to Elisa's inclusive standards. Dr. Allen, a respected but rigid physician, had been one of the most vocal critics behind closed doors. To him, Monarch's prestige lay in its exclusivity, and he viewed Elisa's reforms as a dilution of that legacy. he and a small group of like-minded individuals would meet in whispers after hours, sharing their grievances and finding subtle ways to undermine Elisa's efforts. One evening, as Elisa reviewed reports in her office, she received an anonymous email detailing some of the underhanded tactics these staff members were employing to preserve the old ways. They were intentionally stalling initiatives, causing delays in hiring diverse candidates, and even denying certain patients treatment under fabricated pretenses. Anger bubbled within Elisa as she read the email. But instead of reacting impulsively, she took a deep breath and collected her thoughts. She knew that confronting these individuals directly would only fuel their defiance. Instead, she decided on a different approach, a series of quiet, strategic meetings with influential allies who supported her vision. She would address the resistance without causing a public scandal, maintaining the integrity of her mission while slowly dismantling the obstacles within. Over the next week, Elisa personally engaged with every department head, reinforcing the hospital's new policies and making it clear that anyone who didn't align with the mission was welcome to leave. One by one, those resisting began to see their options dwindling. Slowly, Elisa's steadfast resolve won over some of her critics, while those who refused to adapt chose to resign, quietly exiting the hospital they had once dominated. Despite the challenges, Elisa knew that transparency was key to fostering trust among the staff and patients alike. She held an open forum for all hospital employees, inviting questions and addressing concerns head-on. She shared her vision for Monarch Health openly, emphasizing the hospital's responsibility to provide equitable care and the importance of its newfound role as a model for inclusive healthcare. In one memorable moment, a young resident named Sarah stood up and nervously asked, "Ms. Warren, I think what you're doing here is amazing. But aren't you afraid of losing the prestige that Monarch is known for? I mean, does making it more accessible dilute what makes us special?" Elisa smiled at the question, sensing that many others in the room had similar concerns. "I understand your worry, Sarah," she replied warmly. "But ask yourself this, what is true prestige? Is it serving only those who can pay the highest price? Or is it offering the best care to everyone who walks through our doors?" Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as did others around the room. Elisa continued, "Monarch's prestige doesn't lie in its exclusivity, it lies in our skill, our dedication, and our willingness to help people, no matter who they are. I believe that when we measure our success by the lives we impact rather than by how many we turn away, we become greater than ever." The applause that followed was genuine, and Elisa could feel the shift. The staff, some of whom had initially harbored doubts, now saw the value in her vision. Trust was building, and with it, Monarch's identity was evolving into something stronger. More compassionate word of Monarch Health's transformation continued to spread, and public opinion was fiercely divided. Some celebrated Elisa as a trailblazer, someone unafraid to challenge the norms of a traditionally rigid industry. She became a hero to many who felt underserved by the healthcare system, a symbol of resilience and change. Her story was covered by major media outlets, and patients from diverse backgrounds now sought treatment at Monarch, knowing they would receive compassionate, unbiased care. Yet, along with praise came criticism. Certain media outlets, funded by powerful figures who opposed her reforms, painted her as a disruptor, someone recklessly dismantling a long-standing institution. Editorials warned that her changes would lower the quality of care and compromise standards. They accused her of turning Monarch into a charity hospital rather than a premier healthcare institution. Elisa took the criticism in stride, maintaining her focus on the work at hand. She knew that changing perceptions would take time, and that her mission was bigger than individual opinions. But as she watched the influx of new patients, many of whom had never been welcomed at a place like Monarch before, she felt renewed determination. For every critic, there were 10 people whose lives were being transformed by the changes she had fought to implement as Monarch Health grew and evolved. So too did Elisa's responsibilities and pressures. Long days turned into even longer nights. And her dedication to the hospital often left little time for herself. Friends and family noticed her absence, concerned that she was pouring all of herself into this mission with little regard for her own well-being. One evening, as she sat alone in her office, surrounded by paperwork and half-finished reports, she felt a pang of loneliness. The success of her mission had come at a cost. While she had revolutionized the hospital and built an enduring legacy, she had sacrificed much of her personal life in the process. Her assistant, Maria, knocked softly on the door, breaking her train of thought. "Ms. Warren, you've been here for hours. Maybe it's time to call it a night?" Elisa looked up, offering Maria a tired smile. "Thank you, Maria. I'll leave soon. I promise." But as Maria turned to go, Elisa felt a sudden need to share her thoughts. "Do you ever wonder," she began, her voice soft, "if all of this is worth it? All the sacrifices, the late nights, the criticism. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." Maria paused, then returned to the desk, her expression gentle. "Ms. Warren, you've done something extraordinary. I see it every day, in the patients who now feel safe here, in the staff who feel empowered to do their best. You may not always see the impact, but it's real. And it's worth it." Elisa nodded, grateful for the words. Maria was right. She had started this journey to make a difference, to leave a lasting impact. And despite the sacrifices, she knew that her work at Monarch was the legacy she wanted to leave behind as the hospital approached the anniversary of Elisa's takeover. The board organized a special event to honor the transformation Monarch had undergone under her leadership. Staff, patients, and even some high-profile figures attended, eager to celebrate the progress and acknowledge the journey. During the event, Elisa took to the stage, her voice carrying a tone of both gratitude and conviction. She reflected on her own journey, the rejection that had first brought her to Monarch's doors, and the vision that had driven her to reshape it from within. This hospital, once a fortress of exclusivity, has become a sanctuary of healing for everyone, she said, her voice ringing with emotion. "The work we've done here has shown me that real change is possible when we open our hearts and minds. Monarch Health is more than a hospital now, it's a symbol of what can happen when we choose compassion over prejudice, equality over elitism, and humanity over hierarchy." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. Elisa could see the pride in the faces of her staff, the gratitude in the eyes of former patients who now felt seen and valued. This was the culmination of her vision, a moment she would carry with her forever. With Monarch Health now firmly established as a leader in inclusive healthcare, Elisa began exploring ways to extend her mission beyond the hospital walls. She launched initiatives to provide free or low-cost medical care in underserved communities, creating partnerships with other hospitals to expand access to quality healthcare. Her journey became an inspiration to others across industries, sparking conversations about reform and equity far beyond the healthcare sector. Elisa was invited to speak at conferences, contribute to healthcare reform panels, and advise policymakers on creating more inclusive systems. Yet, even with these new opportunities, Monarch Health remained her priority. She continued to walk its corridors, engage with its staff, and ensure that her vision remained at the heart of every decision. Monarch Health wasn't just a hospital anymore, it was a beacon of change, a place where everyone mattered. And Elisa Warren, the woman who had once been turned away, was the driving force behind it all. And as she looked forward, she knew that her work was far from over. The legacy she had built would continue to evolve, shaping the future of healthcare for generations to come as Monarch Health's transformation progressed. Elisa found herself building unexpected relationships with some of the hospital's long-serving staff. While initially skeptical, many of them had come to respect her resilience, admiring her for pushing through resistance and staying true to her mission. One such relationship was with Dr. Marion Evans, a seasoned oncologist with over 30 years at Monarch. Dr. Evans had witnessed the hospital's shift from a modest establishment to an elite fortress. She'd seen patients turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with their health and had once viewed these practices as necessary. Yet, as she worked closely with Elisa, she felt her perspective shifting. One afternoon, Dr. Evans invited Elisa to her office to discuss a new community outreach initiative Elisa had proposed. As they discussed the logistics, Dr. Evans paused, studying Elisa with a softened gaze. "I have to admit," Dr. Evans began, her voice tinged with emotion, "when you first arrived, I didn't think Monarch could handle such drastic changes. I thought exclusivity was what made us the best. But seeing the difference you've made in patients' lives, it's opened my eyes." Elisa smiled warmly, grateful for the candor. Change is hard, especially when it challenges things we've believed for so long. But when we see the impact, the way people's lives are transformed, it reminds us why we're here. Dr. Evans nodded, a newfound respect shining in her eyes. "I've dedicated my life to this place, but I'd forgotten why I became a doctor in the first place. Thank you for reminding me." The conversation with Dr. Evans left Elisa feeling both humbled and validated. Building these bridges with Monarch's veterans was as crucial as the structural changes she was implementing, and she felt their support bolstering her vision. One of the most rewarding aspects of Elisa's journey was seeing the direct impact her changes had on patients who had previously been marginalized. One morning, as she made her rounds, she was introduced to a patient named Clara, a young woman from a disadvantaged background who had been denied access to care for years due to her financial struggles. Clara's case was severe, but under the new policies Elisa had enacted, she was admitted without question and placed under the best possible care. When Elisa visited her, Clara's mother, Mrs. Rodriguez, looked up with tearful eyes, her hands clasping Elisa's in gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice choked with emotion. "My daughter would have been left to suffer if it weren't for you. This hospital has given her a chance we never thought we'd have." Elisa squeezed her hand gently. "Your daughter deserves the same care as anyone else. I'm just grateful we could be here for her." Seeing the gratitude in Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes and the hope in Clara's smile reinforced Elisa's purpose. Moments like these fueled her determination, reminding her that every policy change, every battle fought, had real, life-altering consequences for people who had once been invisible to the system. As Monarch Health's transformation continued to unfold, Elisa found herself reflecting on her journey, feeling a mixture of pride and doubt. Despite the victories, the path had been anything but easy, and the weight of responsibility often felt overwhelming. The whispers of criticism, though quieter now, still lingered at the back of her mind, and the pressures of maintaining Monarch's new legacy pressed heavily on her shoulders. One evening, after a particularly long day, Elisa sat alone in her office, gazing out at the city lights. She thought of the sacrifices she'd made, the relationships she'd put on hold, the friends she'd barely seen in months. For so long, her life had been dominated by this mission, and in moments of quiet, she wondered if she'd lost pieces of herself along the way. Just as the doubt began to take hold, she received a call from an old friend, Lydia, whom she hadn't spoken to in weeks. Lydia had been a constant supporter, one of the few people who truly understood Elisa's drive. "I just wanted to check in," Lydia said warmly. "I know how much you're giving of yourself. But remember, Elisa, you don't have to do it all alone." Her friend's words were a balm to Elisa's weary soul. She realized that in her determination to forge this legacy, she'd isolated herself from the very people who could support her. That night, she resolved to reconnect with the friends and family who had stood by her, knowing that the strength they provided would only make her mission stronger just when things seemed to be stabilizing at Monarch. A crisis erupted that threatened to unravel everything Elisa had built. An influential politician, who had previously donated generously to the hospital under its old regime, voiced his opposition to the changes at Monarch. Using his platform, he accused Elisa of undermining the quality of healthcare and mismanaging the institution. The allegations were exaggerated, but his voice held sway over a significant portion of the public. And soon, media outlets began to pick up the story. As the accusations spread, Monarch's reputation came under fire. Patients who had once sought care at Monarch out of exclusivity began to pull away, citing the hospital's new direction as a reason for their departure. The board was shaken, and even Elisa's most loyal allies began to question if her vision was worth the backlash. Determined not to let the criticism derail her mission, Elisa called a press conference. Standing in front of cameras and reporters, she spoke passionately about her commitment to quality, equality, and patient dignity. Healthcare is not a privilege, but a fundamental right, she stated firmly, her voice resonating with conviction. Monarch Health is committed to providing the highest quality care to every person, regardless of their background. These changes are not a compromise in quality, they are a restoration of humanity in medicine. Her words struck a chord with the public. And slowly, the tide of criticism began to ebb. People who had once been silent in support came forward, sharing their own positive experiences with Monarch and defending Elisa's vision. The crisis, though challenging, strengthened Elisa's resolve and solidified her standing as a leader willing to fight for her principles as Monarch regained stability. Elisa received a visit from someone who had played a pivotal role in her early life, her former mentor, Dr. Benjamin Carter. Dr. Carter had been the one to inspire her to pursue healthcare reform, planting the seed of her ambition during her early days in the industry. When she saw him, now elderly but still vibrant, standing in the lobby, her face broke into a wide smile. She rushed to greet him, enveloping him in a hug. "I had to see it for myself," Dr. Carter said, his voice filled with pride. "I've read about everything you've done here, Elisa. I couldn't be prouder." Elisa felt a swell of gratitude. "Dr. Carter, none of this would have been possible without you. You taught me what healthcare should be about. And that's what inspired all of this." They spent the afternoon reminiscing, sharing stories of her early years and reflecting on the long road that had led to this moment. Dr. Carter's presence reminded Elisa of the origins of her dream, reigniting her passion and reaffirming her purpose. It was a reunion that not only filled her with joy but also served as a powerful reminder of the impact one person's vision could have on another as the years passed. Monarch Health continued to thrive under Elisa's leadership. Her reforms had become embedded in the hospital's culture, and what had once been an institution shrouded in exclusivity was now celebrated as a sanctuary of hope and compassion. Elisa's journey had been fraught with obstacles, but each challenge had strengthened her resolve, cementing her legacy as a pioneer of change in healthcare. One evening, as she walked through the hospital, she paused outside a wing that had recently been renamed in her honor, the Elisa Warren Center for Inclusive Medicine. She hadn't expected such recognition, but as she gazed at the plaque, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the legacy she had built, not just a hospital, but a vision realized. Standing there, Elisa reflected on the journey she had taken, From a woman once turned away by Monarch Health to the leader who had transformed it. She knew that the work was far from over. That the need for compassionate, equitable healthcare would continue long after her tenure. But she also knew that she had left Monarch Health in capable hands, with a foundation built on the values she had fought so hard to establish. As she looked out at the bustling hospital, the people who had become her second family, and the lives that would continue to be changed by her legacy, Elisa felt a profound peace settle within her. She had taken a place that once symbolized exclusivity and turned it into a haven of hope. A testament to what one person could achieve when fueled by conviction and compassion. And as she turned to leave, a smile played at her lips. Her journey had been long, but it was worth every step. Monarch Health would stand as her legacy, a place where every patient mattered, where every life was valued, and where compassion reigned above all else as the years passed. Monarch Health became a beacon of change in healthcare, with Elisa Warren at its helm. Under her guidance, the hospital grew to embody her values, evolving from an exclusive fortress into a place of open, compassionate healing. Elisa's dream, once sparked by rejection, had now reshaped the very foundation of an industry. Yet even as Monarch Health thrived, she knew her time there was coming to a close. She had poured her heart into the hospital, but now she felt ready to step back and pass on the torch to a new generation. One evening, as she walked the familiar halls, she reflected on all that had changed. The same corridors that once symbolized exclusion were now alive with the spirit of inclusion and care. Staff members greeted her warmly, many stopping to thank her for the path she had paved. Doctors, nurses, and administrators who had once questioned her vision now saw the impact it had on patients and themselves. Monarch Health was no longer just a hospital, it was a community of healers united by purpose. That night, Elisa gathered with her closest colleagues, mentors, and friends for a farewell ceremony held in the hospital's newly dedicated Elisa Warren Center for Inclusive Medicine. As they celebrated her contributions, she found herself reflecting on her journey with a sense of peace and fulfillment. Dr. Evans, the oncologist who had once been skeptical of Elisa's reforms, was the first to speak. She raised her glass, her voice filled with emotion as she addressed the room. Elisa, you've taught us all what it truly means to care. This hospital is forever changed because of you. And so are we. Thank you for showing us a better way. Her words resonated with the crowd, many of whom shared personal stories about how Elisa's vision had transformed their approach to care. She had not only reformed policies but had inspired a shift in mindset, bringing warmth and compassion into every corner of Monarch Health. The impact was undeniable. And as Elisa listened to the words of gratitude, she felt the weight of her work with a quiet pride. One by one, her colleagues shared memories of the obstacles they'd overcome together, the changes that had seemed impossible, and the countless lives that had been touched by Elisa's determination. Her assistant, Maria, recalled the long nights, the quiet moments when Elisa had doubted herself but had never given up. Even Dr. Thompson, who had once been one of her most formidable critics, stood up to express his respect. Elisa, he said. His usually stern expression softened. I may not have agreed with you in the beginning, but seeing what you've accomplished here, I understand now. You've created something far greater than any of us could have imagined. Elisa smiled, her heart full as she accepted their words. Her journey had been defined by struggle and resilience. But it was moments like this that reminded her why she had fought so hard as the ceremony came to a close. Elisa reflected not only on the hospital but on the broader influence her journey had sparked. Monarch Health's transformation had inspired healthcare facilities across the country to evaluate their own practices. And Elisa had become a sought-after advocate for healthcare reform. Her story had shown the world that change was possible, That inclusivity could elevate an institution rather than diminish it. Media outlets and healthcare journals often featured Monarch Health as a model of progressive healthcare. And Elisa's vision had ignited a movement toward compassionate, accessible care in hospitals across the nation. Medical schools began incorporating her principles into their curricula, training new doctors and nurses to prioritize empathy and respect in their practice. The ripple effect of her work reached far beyond Monarch, transforming the way people approached healthcare on a national scale. Elisa had always known that her work would extend beyond the walls of one institution. But seeing the change on such a grand scale filled her with a new sense of purpose. She knew that the legacy she had built was not just hers but belonged to everyone who had been part of the journey, from her loyal staff to the countless patients who had trusted her vision as she prepared to leave Monarch Health. Elisa felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia. She thought back to the day she had first walked through its doors. A powerful but rejected woman seeking care and understanding. That moment of exclusion had set her on a path she could never have foreseen. One that had ultimately led her to reshape her own understanding of resilience, purpose, and compassion. Her experiences at Monarch had transformed her not only as a leader but as a person. She had learned to confront adversity with grace, to navigate resistance with strength, and to balance empathy with authority. Monarch Health had tested her in ways she hadn't expected. But it had also brought out the very best in her. One afternoon, as she made her final rounds, she visited Clara, the young woman she had met early in her tenure, who was now in remission. Clara greeted her with a beaming smile, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Warren," Clara said softly. "I'm alive because of you." Elisa felt a lump rise in her throat. "No, Clara," she replied, holding the young woman's hand. "You're alive because of your own strength and courage. I just made sure you had a place where that courage could thrive." As she left Clara's room, Elisa knew that her work had always been about more than policy changes and reforms. It was about creating a space where people like Clara could find hope and healing, a sanctuary where every life was valued. In her final week at Monarch, Elisa met with the person she had chosen to carry forward her legacy, Dr. Naomi Blake. A compassionate and visionary leader who had been one of Elisa's strongest allies from the beginning. Dr. Blake shared Elisa's commitment to equity. And Elisa felt confident that she was the right person to lead Monarch into its next chapter. As they sat in Elisa's office, Dr. Blake looked at her mentor with admiration. "You've left some big shoes to fill, Elisa. But I promise you, I'll honor everything you've built here." Elisa smiled, reaching out to clasp Dr. Blake's hand. "I know you will, Naomi. Remember, it's not about following in my footsteps. It's about making this place even better than before. Keep fighting for what's right, and Monarch will continue to thrive." With a sense of closure, Elisa passed the reins, entrusting her legacy to someone she believed would protect it. She knew that Monarch Health was in good hands and that the spirit of compassion and inclusivity would live on as Elisa left Monarch Health for the final time. She took one last look at the building that had once rejected her, that had once symbolized everything she had fought against. Now, it stood as a monument to resilience, to the power of one person's determination to effect change. Her work was not over. Elisa had already started planning new initiatives to address healthcare inequalities in other communities, expanding her reach beyond Monarch. She wanted to bring her message of hope and inclusivity to places that lacked access to quality care, helping to transform the healthcare landscape on an even broader scale. With every step she took, Elisa felt a deep sense of purpose. She had dedicated herself to Monarch Health, but now she was ready to tackle new challenges, to bring her vision of compassionate care to even more people. Her journey had come full circle, but her story was far from finished. As she walked away from Monarch Health, her heart was light. her spirit unwavering. She had left behind a legacy of healing, of empathy, of empowerment, and she carried with her the knowledge that her work would continue to inspire change for generations to come. Elisa's legacy at Monarch Health was more than just a transformation of an institution, it was a transformation of hearts and minds. She had taken a place rooted in exclusivity and turned it into a sanctuary for all, building a legacy that transcended the walls of the hospital. Her journey was one of courage, resilience, and unwavering belief in the power of compassion. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that Monarch Health would forever stand as a testament to the change one person could bring to the world. Elisa Warren had entered Monarch Health as an outsider, but she left as its true heart, her spirit woven into every corner of the institution. And though her steps carried her away, her presence would remain, guiding the hospital and everyone it touched into a brighter, more inclusive future. The world had been changed by her vision, and that vision would live on, a lasting reminder that even in the face of adversity, compassion could reign supreme. As Elisa prepared for her official last day at Monarch Health, emotions ran high. Staff members who had worked closely with her gathered in the main atrium for a farewell celebration, filling the room with laughter, gratitude, and shared memories. The people she had inspired, doctors, nurses, administrators, and patients alike, looked up to her with admiration. They knew her departure marked the end of an era, but they also knew she had set a powerful course for the hospital's future. Standing at the front of the room, Elisa took a moment to look out over the faces of those who had been by her side throughout her journey. These were the people who had fought with her, the ones who had embraced her vision and given their best to bring it to life. Each of them represented a piece of the legacy she was leaving behind. As the crowd quieted, she spoke with heartfelt sincerity. It's hard to put into words what this journey has meant to me. When I first came to Monarch Health, I never imagined the impact this place would have on my life. Together, we've transformed this hospital into something greater than we could have dreamed, a place where every patient, regardless of who they are, can find hope and healing. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. The room was silent, every person absorbed in the significance of the moment. This isn't just my legacy, she continued. It's our legacy. Each one of you has contributed to this vision. The work we've done here, the changes we've made, they belong to all of us. And as I step away, I know that Monarch Health will continue to thrive because of the passion, dedication, and heart that you bring to it every day. Tears filled her eyes, and as she looked around the room, she saw many others wiping their own. For a moment, they stood together, united by the shared journey they had taken. Elisa felt a surge of pride, gratitude, and love for the people who had made Monarch Health her home. After the celebration, Elisa took time to say personal goodbyes to the people who had become like family. She shared a quiet moment with Maria, her assistant, who had been her steady companion through late nights and long days. Maria hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'll miss you, Ms. Warren. Working with you has changed my life." Elisa smiled, touched by the words. "Maria, you've been my rock. None of this would have been possible without you." She also spent time with Dr. Evans, her loyal ally, who had once questioned her vision but had come to believe in it wholeheartedly. Dr. Evans took her hand, her voice soft but resolute. "You've done more than change this hospital, Elisa. You've changed us. We're better because of you." The conversations filled her with a bittersweet sense of closure. Each goodbye represented a piece of the journey she was leaving behind, but it also affirmed that her work had left a profound impact on each of them. As she made her way through the halls one last time, she stopped outside the Elisa Warren Center for Inclusive Medicine, taking a moment to appreciate the symbol of her legacy. The wing represented not just the reforms she had made but the spirit of inclusivity and compassion she had infused into Monarch Health. Knowing it would remain as a part of the hospital's identity filled her with a sense of pride and fulfillment. With Monarch Health firmly established as a model of compassionate care, Elisa felt ready to bring her vision to a larger scale. She had spent years transforming one hospital, and now she dreamed of reaching even more people. Over the next few months, she began planning initiatives to bring quality healthcare to underserved communities across the country. Elisa envisioned mobile clinics that would bring essential services to remote and low-income areas, ensuring that everyone had access to preventive care, health education, and medical support. She partnered with organizations that shared her values, developing a network of clinics that could reach those who needed care the most. Her new project, the Warren Health Network, quickly gained traction. With her influence, she secured funding and support from healthcare advocates, philanthropists, and communities that had long been overlooked. Her goal was simple: to create a healthcare system that treated all people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. Elisa found herself more energized than ever, filled with purpose as she embarked on this next phase. She knew the challenges would be immense, but she felt prepared. Her work at Monarch had taught her resilience, and her newfound connections allowed her to rally others to her cause. As she built her team, Elisa also reached out to young healthcare professionals, mentoring them as Dr. Carter had once mentored her. She shared her experiences, teaching them the importance of empathy, courage, and integrity in their work. Watching them learn and grow gave her a renewed sense of hope for the future. Even as she moved forward, Elisa often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought of the rejection that had initially fueled her determination, of the obstacles she had overcome, and of the people who had shaped her path. Each challenge had molded her. Each victory had strengthened her resolve, and each relationship had given her purpose. In quiet moments, she thought back to that day at Monarch Health when she was first turned away. What had once been a painful memory had now transformed into a source of strength. She realized that if she hadn't experienced that rejection, she might never have understood the depth of the healthcare disparities faced by so many. Her journey was proof that even the most painful moments could be catalysts for profound change. Elisa's work had been about more than reforming policies. It had been about creating a culture of empathy, challenging the status quo, and showing that healthcare could be both compassionate and high quality. The impact of her journey was felt far beyond Monarch Health, rippling through the healthcare system and inspiring countless others to consider the role of equity in their own institutions. Though Elisa had left Monarch Health, her legacy continued to flourish within its walls. Dr. Blake, the new leader she had appointed, carried forward Elisa's values, ensuring that the hospital remained a haven of inclusivity and care. Under Dr. Blake's leadership, Monarch expanded its outreach programs, partnering with schools, shelters, and community centers to offer healthcare services to those in need. Former patients who had once been denied care now felt welcomed at Monarch, finding solace in a place that had once seemed unreachable. Staff members upheld the principles Elisa had instilled, treating each patient with dignity and respect, understanding that they were part of a greater purpose. Monarch Health had truly become Elisa's legacy, a place where compassion reigned, where every person mattered. As Elisa continued her work with the Warren Health Network, she often received updates from Monarch Health. Hearing of its continued success filled her with pride, and she knew that her time there had been well spent. Her journey at Monarch had been the foundation for everything she was building, and she would carry the lessons she had learned with her forever years later. As Elisa looked back on her life's work, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had set out to change one hospital, but in the process, she had changed an entire industry. Her vision of compassionate care had reshaped the lives of countless individuals. And her story had inspired a generation of healthcare professionals to fight for equality, empathy, and respect. Sitting in her home office one evening, she leafed through letters and photos from former patients, colleagues, and friends. Each message was a reminder of the lives she had touched, the people who had believed in her, and the legacy she had created. She realized that her journey was not about fame or recognition, but about the lives she had uplifted and the hope she had spread. As she closed her eyes, she thought of Monarch Health, of the patients who had once felt invisible, and of the countless people who would benefit from her work for years to come. Elisa had always believed in the power of compassion, and her life's work had proven that compassion, when combined with resilience, could change the world. Her story was one of courage, transformation, and an unbreakable commitment to justice. Elisa Warren's legacy would live on, a reminder to everyone that one person could indeed make a difference that echoed through the lives of those touched by kindness, respect, and dignity. And with that thought, Elisa knew that her journey was complete. Yet her impact would forever continue, woven into the hearts of those who walked through the doors of Monarch Health and beyond.